Hello and welcome back to Cross Section, the podcast where we talk all that's going on in the news, in the world, in politics, in light of our faith in Jesus. This morning I am back in the host seat, which is super duper exciting, and I'm joined by Danny in the studio. Good morning, Danny.
Good morning.
And Peter over in Northern Ireland. How are you this morning?
Good morning. The sun is shining, which isn't always the case.
It is shining in London too, even though we're in a studio, so have no windows and have no idea about that right now. But it has been lovely enjoying the blue skies this week. Today is the 3rd of March, and we do have a lot to talk about. There are stories, we didn't really have to discuss it this week. But before we get into the main conversations, what's caught our eyes from the news this week? Danny, over to you first.
Well, I just saw this morning that Brewdog has, it's been sold off to a US firm, but they have only bought the brewing operations and the brand for what is actually a very small sum, 33 million. The company has been going through significant challenges. 38 of their pubs have shut with immediate effect, nearly 500 jobs lost. About a dozen pubs are still going to be operating, but for a company that was seen as one of the thriving British businesses, valuation over $1 billion, to have been sold off for 33 million, it's some tough news.
Bad day for them in Brewdog HQ, I'm sure. Peter, anything that's captured your attention?
Well, I did see the Reform had held a press conference at Church House, the Church of England's kind of headquarters or whatever. So lots of people were very upset about that. Which I thought was interesting because it goes to I think it's run by a company, kind of run the venue for them. So you either have to ban all political parties or allow all political parties. So it's kind of interesting, the people who were kicking back. I wonder if the Green Party or Labour or anybody else had held a press conference there, would people be complaining? This is the reality of freedom of speech and freedom of religion at the same time. Faith washing, I think, was the accusation against Reform, and that may be accurate. But it's interesting, the free speech implications as well.
Yeah, interesting. The story that I've picked up on, it's been kind of rumbling for a couple of weeks, but the conversation around student loans and the fact that actually, it's just quite huge costs and inflation for people that went to uni in recent years. I saw there was an article this morning about schools that were comparing it to a £30 a month phone plan and not really explaining the reality of what the student loans were becoming and the debt that many young people are finding themselves in. So that is something that I am seeing talked about quite a lot, which is interesting, and I'm sure we'll carry on.
And I hear you made a little bit of an appearance. Was it on The Guardian's?
The Observer.
The Observer.
Don't go watch it.
On The Observer's Instagram channel talking about it.
We're, crossing over that in a Vox Pop situation, chatting about student loans because everyone's talking about it. So there you go. But from one highbrow, platform to ours, into
much better
into our first kind of main conversation, we will of course be looking at the Green win in Gorton and Denton last week. So Hannah Spencer won with 40.7% of the vote, which is huge for the Greens. Danny, what are your initial reactions to that, and what did it? What does this reflect?
Well, I think my initial thought is that if we'd have recorded on Friday, this would have been the big thing. We're going to come on to talk about what's going on in Iran, and that has overshadowed it in the news over the last few days, unsurprisingly. But this is a significant political shift. By-elections are always unpredictable. Minor parties often outperform. Governments usually do badly in by-elections. It's a chance to give a government a kicking. So that Labour struggled is not a surprise, but what actually happened is really interesting, and it's starting to be reflected more widely in political opinion in the UK. The Greens came first, Reform came second, Labour in third. The Conservatives and the Lib Dems each got less than 2% of the vote. They were only a few hundred above the monster-raving Looney Party. So this really was a battle between the Greens and Reform. Yeah, the margin of victory in the end was actually pretty comfortable for the Green Party. They clearly picked up on really significant frustration and disillusionment with the government. But Reforms, they got roughly 30% of the vote. So it's a good showing. It's better than the national opinion polling, but actually also shows that there are seats where they will struggle to win. I think we can talk a bit more perhaps about what this means for national politics, but it is by far the biggest electoral breakthrough for the Greens. Previously, they'd not won more than 10% in a by-election. I think they'd contested over 100 before. So they've got another MP in Westminster, but it's also put a rocket booster under their national polling ratings. They're up to second in the national opinion polls, behind Reform, both Conservatives and Labour down to 16% each. So politics is getting interesting.
Yeah, it looks very different to how it did. Peter, what's your kind of response to the Green win, and I guess maybe the sort of campaigning and how that all panned out?
So it is a by-election. These are always a little quirky, and you get the anti-government kind of vote and the main parties. But the size of the Green win, as Danny said, like they won fairly convincingly. But I think then, what are their policies? Like, what were people voting for? So you could see there was a kind of pro-Gaza vote was one part of what was going on. There was a coalescing on the left around an anti-reform vote. That seemed to be another aspect of the vote. I saw an article today where they'd gone out on the streets and spoken to a number of the people who'd voted Green, even had signs for Green in the windows and said, do you know that Green had policies around essentially liberalising prostitution, drugs, hard drugs, pornography? And that seemed to come as a surprise to quite a number of their voters. They also said almost nothing about green issues, the environment, and that was commented on by quite a lot of people. So I think it's a really interesting question about who are the Greens? What do they actually stand for? Their policies, fairly limited information out there about where they are on a number of key issues. And so I think people are there's going to be increased scrutiny now, and that's going to be really interesting. And that same thing happened with Reform. They began to win a few seats. People began to look in detail at their policies. I think the same thing will happen with the Greens now. And there's going to be a really interesting conversation about who are the kind of dominant group on the left, who's dominant on the right. Do we have really a five-party system going on? The Labour, Conservative, Reform, Greens, and then essentially the national parties in the other nations? Because they make up about 100 seats too. We could have a really interesting coalition at the next election. But we're still 2 years out from that, so still plenty of time for things to change.
And you've missed the Lib Dems. Lib Dems really are the marginalised middle here. They're getting totally squeezed out. I heard one Lib Dem commentator trying to make the point that the Lib Dems are the ones that care most about the environment now. Because, as Peter said, the environment isn't the big thing that the Green Party are talking about. I think a lot of people like the idea of voting Green. I know a lot of people who would broadly be on the left who think, actually, the Greens, they're a nice party to vote for. We'll vote for them because they want to care about the environment. But actually, they are, certainly how they've presented in this election and in recent years, broadly a party on the left, a socially progressive party, an anti-war party, particularly an anti-war in the Middle East, pro-Gaza, pro-Palestinian party. And you've seen that lead to this really quite odd coalition that you've got. You've got a very, very secular, sometimes quite middle class, predominantly white, traditional Green supporting crowd. But then you've also picked up a very, very strong, largely Muslim vote that is critical of the war in Gaza, critical of Israel and the UK government's support of that. And then that creates some tensions. Yes, okay, they might be agreed on their policy on the war in the Middle East, but actually these are very, very different bodies, particularly on social issues, conservative Muslims and secular progressives. As Peter said, when you start actually thinking about some of the policies and some of the positions, is that going to hold together? Or, and this is what's happening at the moment, or is just the fact that they're not the Conservatives, they're not Labour, they're not the mainstream party, actually they provide a good repository for someone who is disillusioned and frustrated on the left of politics. I'm going to vote for the Green and I don't care about the inconsistency because I want to give the Labour government a kicking, and this is the way that I can do it. It also shows that Plaid Cymru won the Caerphilly by-election with a very tactical voting there. The Greens have won with tactical voting here. It shows the kind of the stop reform vote. In a lot of seats, there is that coalition. It's just whether that would ever be reflected in a general election where the more traditional parties are going to perform better, or at least That's what conventional political wisdom would suggest.
I also do think, like, kind of what you've both mentioned about their, Peter mentioning their policies around kind of drugs, prostitution, pornography, things like that. Those aren't necessarily things they're going to shout about in their posts on social media. And then the power of social media and people seeing what's then reshared and sharing one post that has maybe 5 points or something that seems like, oh, that seems like a good thing, but then not doing your research to find out also the other stuff that maybe you need to dig a bit deeper to find. It's kind of, if there is that disillusionment, it's like, oh, that sounds good. And maybe they're not doing a bit more of the kind of, oh, what do they think about this? And what do they think about this? And where does that all line up?
That's normal.
Yeah.
That is what happens.
Yeah.
And Zach Polanski is a good media performer. He is good on viral clips. He posts, he's very good at the kind of the always on mentality. There's always a clip of him doing something. He responds well and in an articulate way to questions, and actually can be quite disarming around some of the tricky issues. So I think that's one of the main reasons why they're doing well, because he is providing a really strong face for the Green Party. And I think people don't interrogate policies. That is just normal. And the art of politics is actually, well, can you communicate the things that voters need to hear in order for them to be happy to support you? And at the moment, he's doing a good job of just that.
Yeah.
And it will be interesting to see where Labour go in response to this. Do you now have to protect your left flank, if you like? So they have to really push against the Greens, because more recently they've been pushing much more strongly against reform. We've seen immigration announcements yesterday, I think it was, from the Home Secretary. Or are they going to have to recognise that actually they're going to have to speak a lot more about this and kind of shed a light on it? We've seen even Christians reacting to reform, and some are very supportive and engaging, and some are very strongly opposed and saying, really outspoken against it. I haven't seen the same sort of reaction around the Greens. And I do speak to people who say, yeah, I'm kind of broadly pro the environment or whatever, and I'm broadly sympathetic to the Greens. And I'm like, do you have any sense of what they actually stand for? And you start to maybe push into a couple of the issues like, oh, I didn't really realise that. So it'll be interesting to see if we get more of that reaction. I think they've had a free pass to date, as I say, on a lot of issues. But as Danny says, the average voter isn't that interested in policies. Will often get a fairly small snapshot, but you might see a larger kind of shift in the conversation if they really get exposed for not having them. And I'm not saying the policies are wrong. I'm just saying we need to know what they really are, and then people need to know what they're actually voting for.
I saw quite a lot of pushback and engagement. I saw people Christians celebrating the victory on Friday, and people pushing back against that, saying, how can you be a Christian and vote Green? But then likewise, people were saying, how can you be a Christian and vote Reform? And we're seeing more and more of that kind of sense that this isn't a compatible option for Christians. And I think the challenge I have is that actually all parties present problems for Christians when it comes to vote. All parties support things and propose things that, well, I don't like, and I think as Christians actually are contrary to what we believe. The question is, well, how major is that? How significant is that? How do you reconcile that with their wider platform? But I think it is important that as Christians we ask those critical questions, but at the same time that we find opportunities to engage for people in politics with parties, despite our concerns and questions. You're not going to agree with 100% of what a party says, but we should still be engaged politically. And I think that is getting harder for Christians, because the polarization is getting more public. The polarization is getting more, it's becoming a greater part of political life, that when Christians do step into positions of influence within any political party, suddenly there are other Christians saying, how can you be a Christian and support that or support that party? And I saw quite a lot of that on Friday in the wake of the election result.
And I think that is a challenge for churches or church leaders. And traditionally you've said, look, if you vote Conservative and you're Labour, people can understand, they may disagree. I think now with Greens and Reform and the broader spectrum, people are finding it harder to say, well, I vote, let's say, Green, I can't understand how you're Reform, or I vote Reform, I can't understand how you're Green. The spectrum is getting so big, it's getting really difficult to navigate that. But I do think that's something we're going to have to do, and we need to be able to lead by example, unity in the diversity of this moment, and then say why. Like, it has to be secondary. So Christians should be in politics for sure. There are no Christian parties. I totally agree with Danny on that. I have questions for every party. No Christian should be able to say, I'm like fully supportive of everything this party does, because they all have problematic policies. Let's be able to say, I vote them despite that, because overall I think they're closest to my understanding of what the Bible is asking for, and how I vote, not just on behalf of myself, but on behalf of the other, as I put my vote or my X on the ballot box.
Yeah, totally. And as that polarization is in our churches, that is the only way that we can have, if we're going to have, we need to have conversations. We shouldn't shy away from the conversations that are difficult, but coming in and understanding, trying to understand where others are coming from, and understanding that neither are perfect, and we're not going to find that perfect thing, are we? Yeah, but it's interesting. And yeah, if you are a church leader and you're in church and you are struggling with these, the fact that your congregations are just feeling polarized and challenging, we've got lots of different articles kind of talking about different aspects of this, and check it out, because we are aware that these conversations are difficult but are important. Right, we're now going to kind of zoom out a little bit from Gorton and Denton and to look at the conflict in the Middle East. So this weekend was hugely significant with Israel, Iran, and America. I guess kind of we'll frame this conversation as Christians, how do we respond to all of this? But just kind of as we get into that, Danny, what actually happened? Why did things get to the point that they did?
What actually happened? The US and Israel have launched a major offensive on Iran. The supreme leader of Iran, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, I think that's how you pronounce his name, died in one of the first wave. I think it was the first wave of attack over the weekend. There's been sustained bombing over the last few days. The US government saying, well, just this morning, on Tuesday morning, that there is more to come. The big attack hasn't happened yet, or words to that effect. But it's also then the repercussions out of this, of other countries getting involved. Does the UK support it? Does the UK allow the use of their bases for the attacks on Iran? And that started off with a no position, and then that shifted to a yes for defensive measures. But defensive measures can be read quite broadly in protection of our allies in the region. RAF base in Cyprus was attacked by an unmanned drone. There were no people were injured, but there was some damage done through that. I think the big question for me, and I think for a lot of people, is a regime can be really bad. And in some ways, I feel like I'm putting this in really basic terms. A regime can be really bad, but is bombing a way of dealing with that? Do we have any confidence that, one, meaningful regime change will happen? Yes, the supreme leader has been assassinated in a bombing raid, but what's coming next? And then, is it sustainable? There are places all around the globe where over the last 15 or 20 years, 25 years, we've seen interventions, whether it's Afghanistan or Iraq or the Arab Spring, where regimes have changed and actually things haven't got better, and sometimes they've got worse a few years later. And I think that's a bit of a warning that you can have a real problem with a regime, but be really, really uncertain about whether or not your actions will actually help in the longer term. And I think that's the root. Some people are opposed to it on a pacifist ground, that we shouldn't be engaged in the military action. I think for me, it's much more pragmatic. I think actually, is it going to really lead to a better outcome in the longer term?
I think Iran's hugely strategic. Just its location, the size of the country, nuclear capabilities or potential capability are right on the cusp of, does it have it, what it has, its range to do that. It's a pretty hostile player in the region. We've seen that, like it's engaged in Lebanon, it's engaged in Yemen, it has resourced and backed other countries, particularly around Israel. I'm not saying this to justify, I'm just saying that's just the reality. I think for many, including me, the complications of the Muslim world, sometimes we see that as a bit of a kind of just a group that are all aligned or something. Iran disagrees with Saudi and many of the other countries in that area. I mean, it was, I think, well reported that MBS, Mohammed bin Saladin, from Saudi was very supportive of the US striking against Iran. They see Iran as a problem. He, of course, is moving his own country to a much more secular state. He doesn't want religious leaders interfering with his power. So again, it's pretty complicated what's going on. And then, of course, oil and money sitting there, the Straits of Hormuz, where significant levels of oil go through every day. Iran has controlled that. And then, as Danny says, we're looking at regime change, but to what end? Who comes next? You cut off the head, but what's coming next? And just finally to say, I mean, we interviewed David from Elam a number of months ago on this show. He talked about some of the challenges for Iranian Christians in this moment. Those remain, and in the last few weeks, there have been just tens of thousands of people killed, not just Christians, but across the board. There's a regime clamped down. So it was really dangerous place to be. That's not to say this solution is the right one or works, but what was going on before was also incredibly difficult. So I think it is really challenging. More broadly, I think it'd be interesting to talk just about the chaos that is going on at this moment. So I do think this just feeds into that. Danny will laugh and smile because I'm a big fan. That is, I still think, the underlying narrative of where we are more generally in this moment. From Putin in Russia, from Trump is an agent of chaos in many ways, to what's going on in Iran, we are seeing a more chaotic world. And I mean, it's just the reality. Look at people in Abu Dhabi and Dubai and major airports that people fly through all the time being hit. It came from kind of nowhere in most people's minds. This is a pretty significant and chaotic moment, edging us towards more conflict. Medvedev, the former Russian prime minister, talked about, are we on the verge of World War III? I'm not sure we're there, but I do think we're going to see increasing conflict and increasing chaos.
And the ripples of this, you mentioned the airports in Abu Dhabi and Qatar and other places that are disrupted, holidaymakers stranded. So there's all of that. But just the ripple as other countries are drawn in, that Iran attacks other countries in the region and other countries are then drawn in support of those countries. And that's your classic military escalation towards war. And I think the chaos is an important thing. Now, opposition to Iran and opposition to the Iranian regime is not new for Western powers. That has been a staple of the last few decades. But what do you do about it? It's always felt like that there are countries that you don't attack and countries that you might attack. And Iran has always kind of sat in that category of, well, a bit like North Korea, we think they're very bad, but we're not actually going to attack them, partly because of that fears around nuclear capability. But then Trump does what Trump does, and he just goes and does it. It's also notable that for a large part of Trump's profile, he was the president who was going to end wars, with a kind of an American first policy that put American interests first, not engaging in global conflict, wanting to wind down US military involvement overseas. And yet this is a major escalation. It's an air war at the moment. They're not ruling out troops on the ground. It'll be interesting to see if that does happen. Apparently it's a 5-week campaign and they're ahead of schedule, was what I read this morning. So it is that unpredictability. Is America going to be the country that just pulls everything back and is very domestically focused on American interests? Or does it actually see its role as the global policeman? Well, yes, this is them as the global policeman more. There's a regime we don't like. They're doing things we don't like. We're going to act in accordance to that. And I think it will be interesting how that plays out in US politics in terms of their support. If this does become a protracted conflict, is that problematic for Trump's favourability? I would imagine it will be.
A few months ago, Danny, you said that you thought that Trump would be getting the Nobel Peace Prize.
I don't think that's likely.
Okay.
I can recant that.
This is often the way things go in this podcast.
It's not a U-turn. Opinions change as facts change. Yeah. The facts have changed. My opinion has changed.
Mm-hmm.
Brilliant, Danny. Joins a long list of opinions you put out there that have subsequently proven to be changed by the facts.
It is the challenge.
I think.
Sorry, I was just going to say the challenge of having a weekly podcast where we react to things. You might have an opinion that does change very rapidly, but it's been exposed. Anyway, sorry, Peter.
Danny's bold enough to put his opinions out there. It's great. One of our, Alicia, in fact, who's often on with us, shared an article earlier this week about, we'll maybe put it in the show notes, about assumed stability has ended. and Christian mission needs to adapt. It's from, I suppose, our colleagues at the Indian Evangelical Fellowship. And I think this is focused on mission, but I think the basic premise, again, assumes stability has ended. We have been in an incredibly stable period for arguably 70 years. We've talked and hinted about this before. I think this is just a reminder about the level of chaos. Global travel. Like, many people, I certainly didn't think places like Dubai and the Emirates, like major travel hubs that lots of people fly through, were going to be hit. I was in an airport at the weekend. You could see the cancelled flights coming up and people stuck. Travel insurance is going to shift. We've always assumed we could travel almost anywhere in the world. Is that changing? The flows of money that go with that, the ability to move money around the world, the kind of rule of law, the structures and systems that allowed us to have big global operations. This article was about global mission in particular, and just saying, can we assume that over the coming years? And I do think there are some signs of shift around that. I don't think we can presume it in the same way. So I think there's a couple of things for us as Christians. Chaos has always been on the edges. Look, from Genesis 1, the tohu wavahu was the watery chaos. God spoke order into chaos. Chaos edges there, and chaos is a problem, the darkness and chaos. And there are people who like chaos, who kind of almost orchestrate chaos. I think Putin is a figure of chaos. He loves chaos. He loves news stories. He doesn't go all out attack very often. He tried it in Ukraine, and you can see where it gets. Cyber chaos, movement of people chaos, driving migration. I mean, that's a tactic that he is using, and then undermining news feeds. We've seen it. So we are going to, as Christians, we need to respond to the chaos of this moment. That's to pray specifically in Iran for our brothers and sisters there. It's one of the places we have seen one of the biggest kind of revivals and movement of people into faith, particularly in dreams and visions. It's phenomenal what has been happening there. So let's be praying around that. But also to navigate the chaos of by-election results that catch us. I mean, massive changes in the polls there. We're seeing the chaos every day. Navigating that is actually something I think we want to be on the front foot of and to be engaged with. So I think we want to be like, I actually think this is an incredible moment of opportunity. And I don't think it's a surprise we're seeing the kind of quiet revival stats, people more interested in faith. Because in a world of chaos, people go, I wonder, is there something more? And they are turning to spirituality in general, Christianity in particular. So I think this narrative will continue. And as we see it get even more heightened, I think we're going to see more chaos for a while longer. That's just reality. And I think we need to find ways to navigate it, and then to invite, this is a real season of invitation of people into faith. I just think it's a massive moment for doing that in the chaos that we see around us. The world does feel fragile. People feel vulnerable in this moment. And actually, we're saying, find your identity in something else, find your security in a much deeper story. And I think that's actually a really healthy narrative.
It's really helpful. The reality is it is challenging, fragile and chaotic, but actually there is uniqueness that comes with that, of people seeing their need and how weak and dependent, like we don't have any control. So we don't know what huge thing will happen this month, next month, but actually with that, what an opportunity it is to show people to Christ, who is in control when things are spiraling out. You were listening to Cross Section. Thank you so much for engaging with us. We'd love to hear from you. We would love to find out your thoughts on some of the things we're chatting about. Please do get in touch with us at cross.section@eauk.org. We would love to hear your thoughts. So please do send us an email about anything to do with Cross Section. Just to say as well, we're going to have an extra episode coming out this week all about violence against women and girls, and kind of some of the things we're seeing culturally and politically at the moment in terms of that, and how we can respond in our churches. So there will be an extra episode out by the end of this week in time for International Women's Day. But otherwise, we'll be back to normal episodes as well next week. But I will now move us on to our final conversation. And this is something that we have spoken about quite a lot on Cross Section, but we haven't for a little while, and that is assisted suicide. We're going to predominantly talk about what's happening in Scotland, because it's a really significant couple of weeks with the assisted suicide bill there. But firstly, let's just quickly find out where we're at in Westminster. Danny, what's been happening?
Well, I would say we are whimpering towards a conclusion on the terminally ill adults bill, which would introduce assisted suicide in England and Wales. I say whimpering because it's unlikely to come to a crunch vote now. The House of Lords have been considering it since before Christmas in committee. The peers, the members of the House of Lords, have been proposing amendments and discussing those. And the way the House of Lords works is that there isn't a a guillotine on that. They can't cut short the motion. So as long as there are things to discuss and people wanting to discuss the amendments, they are discussed. And because it's a private member's bill, the government have had to give this bill more time already. Before Christmas, they allocated an extra 10 days to it. And the reason it's whimpering out now is the government have said they will not be allocating any more days to it. And the parliamentary session runs out at the start of May. There are, I think, 3 or 4 more days in the allocation left, mostly before Easter and then 1 after Easter. And if they haven't got through the amendments by then, the bill will fall. It will just stop. It won't have been voted on. If it does get through all those amendments, there will be a vote, but I think that is looking increasingly unlikely. There's been criticism by the proposers of the bill, but actually the range of opposition is vast. The number of medical colleges and disability groups, as well as religious charities, Christian organisations and beyond, keep on raising more and more problems because there are more and more problems with this proposed legislation. So it's not confirmed, but it is likely that this will not pass. But we'll keep you updated as that becomes more clarified.
And then the situation in Scotland is slightly different. It's a really unique moment right now. So next week on the 10th of March is stage 3 of their terminally ill adults bill. So the final stage. And at this point, it seems that there only needs to be a handful of MSPs to change their vote that would mean the bill falls and doesn't go through. So it's a really significant time. If you're listening and you're not in Scotland, please do be praying for that bill, that people will change their votes. Chris and our Scotland team has worked really hard meeting with MSPs and churches and engaging them on this bill. But also, if you are in Scotland, do look at what your MSP has voted on. And if they have voted for it, why not get in touch and email them in the coming days and be praying for what is coming with that. It really could change. And
it really is. It's half a dozen, maybe a few more votes that are needed to change there. Next week, 10th and the 11th of March, they'll be discussing the amendments, the final amendments for this. And then the week after, the day's not confirmed, but the week after, I think it's the week beginning, the 16th of March, will be the final vote on assisted suicide in Scotland. And that will come to a crunch vote. Whereas in England, it's unlikely we're going to have that. In Scotland, there will be that vote in a couple of weeks' time.
Yeah, so that's a really helpful distinction, just explaining the kind of differences that are happening in Westminster, in Scotland. But yes, that is a call for all of us to be praying for that bill and praying for our brothers and sisters in the Middle East. I will link links to Elam and Open Doors as well. I've got some stuff on Iran as well that will help us be praying really specifically into some of these things. But for now, thank you so much for listening. Thank you, Danny and Peter, for your helpful contributions to these conversations. And we hope you have a blessed week. Bye.